6:02, I will call to order the work session, the May 21st work session for the Columbia Borough Planning Commission. Uh, There are no minutes, as this is our first work session. And the work session is designed for discussion. And basically, what we can do at these work sessions is make recommendations that we will carry through to our regular planning meeting. So as Jess and I just discussed, any recommendations, or I'm not going to say decisions, that are made at this meeting will have to be carried through to our June regular planning commission meeting for action. The work session is just that. It's the discussion for setting your agenda for your regular meeting. So with that in mind, the first thing we have on this agenda, and these are the two items that were carried over from our April Planning Commission meeting, and they are worded exactly as they were there. So the first item is the zoning map amendments, discussions, prioritization. And if you can recall at the last meeting, what we were discussing then was the future from the, and I'm going to digress a bit. The plan was in publication.
It's being printed now. I wanted to be able to bring it, but we had to go back, and page numbers got cut off, and we had to go and fix fix it so the page numbers didn't cut off.
Okay, so I just wanted to note, because I know there have been questions the last couple meetings about when we would be getting hard copies.
Yep, I will have them.
I wanted to bring you.
I'll drop them off here as soon as they're done, like days.
Okay. All right, Jess handed us a new map here. What do we have here, Jess?
All right, so a pickup from our conversation in April. The 11 by 17 shows the top half is the existing zoning, and what we're paying attention to specifically is the existing boundary of the conservation district and the existing extent of the medium density zoning off of South 9th Street. So the first part, the conservation district. The boundary of the conservation district is being expanded to incorporate the areas that were identified on the McGinnis site plan as being cultural and recreation areas. So either because of walking paths or future recreation, or because we know or believe there to be some sort of cultural significance, this area was identified as to be preserved.
Hi, Nathan. So basically what the change is almost like squaring off that line at the south end of the McGinnis property.
And what we did was we just overlaid the site plan, the master plan for the McGinnis redevelopment over top of the zoning map.
Okay.
So that's the first change. The second change developed as a result of our conversation in April. The owner of the properties just south of Penn Street, it's a triangular property and a rectangular property. They're owned by Steiner is the last name. I can't remember and Tom. Deb and Tom. Right now they are light business. It's a non-conforming use. They've got pretty restrictive standards in terms of what they can do with their residential property. Their preference is to have it not as conservation, but as medium density residential. It works. I see no issues with doing that, and it will not impact the McGinnis redevelopment. So what you're shown on the bottom is the Steiner's properties, 2 properties being shown as medium density residential, and then the expanded boundary of the conservation district.
Makes sense.
Because originally they were almost like part of the McGinnis property there.
So moving forward, if nobody has any questions or any concerns to discuss, then we can put this on the Planning Commission's June agenda for the Planning Commission to make a recommendation to Borough Council to send this on to the Lancaster County Planning Department for their formal review, and then to set up an advertising and public hearing schedule for the amendment or the modification.
And that would that be an amendment to the zoning?
It'd be an amendment to the zoning map, so we'd actually have to post the properties around that area so that everybody knew that there was a zoning change specifically occurring to those properties. Oh, there are spares here. Can we pass this down and do a chain?
Nathan's gonna catch up with it.
Yeah, I apologize for staying late. I got tied up with the work thing.
No, that's quite all right, Nathan. Okay, do you follow what we were discussing?
Yeah. I'm getting just.
What we were looking at is here. Expand conservation. This is McGinnis property. This is the conservation. Now, there are private properties here that are like business, that are very restricted and to make them
What is the address? Is this the 740 stuff?
No, that's it's on there.
It's on here.
It is, that parcel is there,
Okay.
but that parcel is,
Oh, okay. Got it.
it hasn't been, I don't think that's actually been voted on yet by Borough Council. 740 South 12th Street, does that ring a bell with you? We only just got comments back from the County Planning Commission last week.
I saw the,
Yeah.
and it's this,
Did I get the right one?
no,
Oh, I did get the right one, sorry about that.
So if I exit out, it looks like that's the spot there. So
yeah,
I'm going to put a circle around.
yeah, that's the one, that's 747. Well, yeah, we made the recommendation to council to move forward with that zoning. And where I would be coming from with moving that forward is that when is that up for public sale? And it's being offered for public sale as medium density residential. And at this point, that's still light business. So that zoning needs to go through before that sale can occur under those parameters. And I think that sale is June 1st. So council needs to, yeah,
What would impact though, who's the sale going to?
it's a public auction.
I don't think it would impact, given the fact that I think people purchase properties all the time that they think are zoned appropriately for one use and they find out that it's not. That's sort of a buyer beware, right? Unless they're using financing, which
You don't know at this point.
no, so I don't think that there's a super huge rush if somebody's buying it knowing that we're going to, at some point it'll be medium density.
What gets me is we made that recommendation at our February meeting, and it's still dragging, you know.
It takes, I mean, we only just, so that you made that recommendation at your February meeting. It
Right.
was submitted to the County Planning Commission in March. And there were 2 rounds of comments back and forth about 15 days apart. We just got comments, so it drags, but there was really no hesitation around it, just
It just
coordination.
seemed like it took forever for it to process through. Yes, when I was in with Paula on last week, she had just gotten the comments back from county planning.
Is there a way to make mention of it prior to the auction?
Can we, if we want to make it medium residential, somebody buys it, makes it industrial as it is right now,
It's like,
we can't stop that.
No, yeah, you can, because just because they buy it doesn't mean that they can develop it. They have to submit permits. So we'd want to make sure that we had that rezoning in place before they submitted any development plans. But acquiring it, just straight up acquiring it doesn't mean that it's bound to the zoning.
But the sign out there states that it's medium density residential.
Yeah, that's very.
I think you're in a shady.
I gotta hold off on the vote on the auction.
Or you could just announce what's going on. I think you can deal with that
I
on
think
the
there needs to
spot.
be some clarity.
I think you need to do an addendum to the sale.
I'm not involved in that. I just gave you my professional planning opinion and based on my experience.
The auctioneers disclose it.
Okay, moving on. We've gone past 740 South Front Street.
We weren't even supposed to go there. I just asked if that was part of it.
Okay,
Sorry.
okay.
Better now than later when the real show's on.
Yeah.
Okay. Would we want to call this something to refer to? You know, when we get to that point about making a recommendation that we're referencing this?
I would just call it the McGinnis site map amendment, and then we can put both items in it.
Gotcha. We'll call this the Guinness site map amendment.
And the action on that will be on our
June.
regular planning.
Yep.
Good.
So I'll coordinate with you, Paula.
And last month, we did go over, with Jess. She had presented us with this Columbia Borough zoning map and future land use map. Information as how we arrived at these. And what we're looking at is to minimize our zoning districts. We've got way too many zoning districts. I don't know, if you want to pick up on this again. One of my questions is, to change these zoning districts, like you created, or we looking at creating a utility zoning district. Utility railway easement rights of way, generally not suitable for development. So, excuse me, so just recently, one of the, part of what is included in that utility zoning issue is property that we just zoned highway commercial limited access. Now, and that was for that humongous billboard out there off of 3rd and Linden.
Yeah, the old visitor center.
So how is something like that, does that carry over if you change the zoning?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an existing use prior to.
Just
So it's, they've already have it there. It's sort of tied to what Eric's concern is. So here's the way zoning works. You own the property, you have a use on it, the municipality changes the zoning, you're good to go because you're an established permitted use. And even if the zoning makes you non-conforming, there are still guidelines in the ordinance that prevent you from having to, like, if disaster happens and the entire site is destroyed, then you're in a bind and you're going to have to rebuild and be in conformance with the ordinance. But if it's like anything less than 25% or more than 25%, you can still stay there. So, but it's tied to the existing use and the existing development. If, say, you purchase a parcel that you don't have development on and it goes and gets rezoned, I mean, that's the way it happens, and you might not like it and it may not fit with your future plans, but that's sort of, if you have future plans, these are the areas that, this is where you want to be talking with the decision makers, saying, I understand why you want to rezone this to medium density residential, but I really like this being light business, and this is what I can do. And that's sort of a conversation back and forth. But the use has to be there. So for the sign, it could either be a non-conforming use, or you could allow off-site, off-premises signage in the utility district.
So it's physically located in the utility district? Or in?
Well, this is future land use. And
Right,
so,
right.
so the future land use was developed so that anything that was within the right of way, because highway commercial off of the interchange there for 30 is a huge area.
Right.
But really, when you think about it, it's not, because we can't do highway commercial development within the right of way.
No.
Yeah.
Pretty much the only thing they can get in the right of way is the sign,
Mhm.
permitted by the state. So I would almost say, because it's the state that's allowing it within their right of way, we just allow it as an accessory use or a permitted use within a utility right of way.
And then to define, when you would define the uses in a new utility zone. Where I'm coming from here, my thoughts are coming from here, because one of the things when that went through is we said that is the only place that we were rezoning to that effect. But if you were to rezone a larger area as utility, when you would do your permitted uses, you could prohibit such things within, or you would have parameters in there that somebody couldn't do something like that down on 441.
Right.
Well, you know, that's where, that was where I was coming from
I understand that.
with part of that, you know. That was one of the things that we said was, you know, that was the only portion, but now if you're rezoning and making.
Well, let's think about it. Let's think about it the way it is currently. So
Right.
right now, that area is all highway commercial. And
Right.
in the ordinance specifically, it identified that the only place you could do that was Route 30.
Right.
I don't,
Limited access.
Limited
Highway Route
access.
30, yeah.
I don't
Right.
see why it needs to be any different if you
Correct.
rezone that
It
area
wouldn't
as
qualify
utility.
down on
Well,
441.
Because there are two, I mean, look, they're highway commercial, or the existing zoning,
Yeah. It's
whatever
already there on
that was
Right.
sufficient to keep the signage, where am I? Here, and not get it here.
Right.
So I don't see why you couldn't do the same thing with the utility district and
Okay.
stipulate that it's only there along the limited access.
Is that type of sign, is it regulated by, it is regulated by district, but
It's usually those
Is it-
types of signs are regulated by off-premises signage regulation within
Yeah.
your ordinance under signage.
right,
And then it's also regulated by PennDOT because it's their right of way.
right. So it wouldn't really affect it too much when it was zoned, the land, because it's,
No, but that's a really good conversation, and
But it
that's
was
exactly
just
what we want to
something
talk
that came
about.
up to me, I'm thinking, you know, we just did this, and now we're looking at changing, you know, and how does that affect what we did?
exactly.
My recommendation would be, or it wouldn't, because we would carry over that regulation into the utility zoning district.
Are we still looking at having the table of the permitted, of the uses? The table?
Well, it depends on how we want the ordinance to go. The recommendation in the comprehensive plan was to try and move towards some form-based code requirements in certain areas. Maybe not everywhere. Maybe we don't have to worry about our residential zones. But I think it would make sense to try and explore doing a form-based code setup in our commercial areas, in our downtown areas. And here's what the difference is. So traditional zoning is concerned completely about separation of land uses, right? But we know now today that separation of land uses will kill a neighborhood and kill a downtown. We need to have that vitality and that diversification of uses. So what a form-based zoning ordinance does is it's more concerned about the built environment and less about what you're doing there. So we're talking more about making sure that we're not getting buildings that are at a height that would be so abnormal it would ruin the character of the neighborhood. We're talking about facade materials, we're talking about massing within the building, making sure that we're getting something that's going to fit within the neighborhood, less about what they're proposing to do there. So I think there would be a table, but it would probably be a much smaller table where we're saying, personal service establishments, and that covers like that, maybe not dry cleaning, but you know what I mean? Like that's salon, that's pet shop, that's all sort, and so just simplifying it. So I'm not really sure. It depends on, you can do both. You can have a use table, you cannot. It really just depends on what the planning commission, how we want to write it.
Does Ephrata have form base? I'm trying to think if Ephrata or Lidditz has form base.
Lidditz does.
Mhm. I can't remember offhand. I know it. I think you are right. It's one of them.
One of them does.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think they do.
I think it's helpful.
So, okay, so the idea of moving more towards the future land use map in concept for the zoning districts, to cut down on the number, that sort of thing, that where we left off with.
And
Would you feel comfortable taking a crack at that?
Well, that's what I'm going to be doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So you'll say,
Yep.
hey, if this is what we're translating that to that, you'll come up with the draft.
Yeah. What
for us to
my
look at.
vision is that we're going to move through short-term rental first and get that taken care of, get it off our plate, get it moving through the process, and then we'll pick up on the gateway commercial areas, and whether or not we want to see two different, gateway east versus gateway west or north south. I am terrible with the direction along the river. You guys are at a
Up
quirky
or
angle.
down.
Yeah, exactly.
runs
So
north to south.
Does it? Thank you.
North to south.
So we could have a north versus south area. And so what I'm going to be thinking about is if we're going to go with a form-based code approach for those two areas at first, I'm going to be concerned with how do we do that exactly? So I think that there are going to need to be character assessments that are done for those neighborhoods. We're going to want to get an average sort of, this is what the block face looks like in this particular block. And so within those form-based codes, within that area, there are, you could argue, are you really making it easier? But you're going to have almost subsets within those areas. So if you're in block 2B, these are the forms that you need to follow in terms of infill development or new development.
That's a good plan.
Yes, it does. And thank heaven we have Jessica to guide us on this. And I would encourage any of the other members here to please speak up. You have thoughts, issues, direction for where we're going. But I really, myself, I like the future land use map. I like the way it's laid out. We're eliminating some things, we're combining. There is no need for all of these different, like medium density residential business. It's medium density residential. It's medium density,
Yep.
So I would like to see us move forward with the future land use map being our guide to our zoning and how we're moving forward. Okay. So we will again continue this conversation. And we have felt that with Jessica's help, we don't have a lot on our plates right now.
Yeah.
And we will be the ones to move this forward.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
Looking forward to it.
All right. So Jessica, I'm going to go back here a little bit. Based on our discussion about like the highway commercial limited access. When we go to strictly a medium density residential. Now, like right now, and we'll bring this up with our short-term rental, right now, medium density residential business is where it's allowed. So would that carry then to a medium density residential, or will we look at changing that within the short-term rental?
It depends on how we want to move forward. If you can have your short-term rental regulations solely within your zoning ordinance, or you can do a standalone ordinance. Pros and cons, and it really depends upon how you're going to manage it. So if you are a slightly larger metropolitan area and maybe your community development and finance are involved in administering the short-term rental ordinance, because finance is sort of overseeing licensing and collecting
Right.
fees, but then community development is doing it. Sometimes it makes sense in that instance that you have an overarching ordinance that's outside of zoning. In smaller areas, it may make sense to keep it in the zoning ordinance. I think that's a larger question. Regardless, when we do the zoning ordinance update, whatever zoning districts we identify now would then be transferred to what we're moving to in the future. In terms of trying to figure out whether it's a standalone or in the zoning ordinance, is sort of an internal conversation, I think, with staff in terms of how are we going to administer this ordinance? How are we going to assess a fee? Who's going to be reviewing it? Are we going to be involving multiple different departments where you need to have enforcement powers beyond the zoning or planning department? Staffing implications are important to think about. So that was going to be a part of a different conversation, but still related to short-term rentals. I don't want to go beyond what you said, though.
Right.
Does the borough define, so there's a residential rental program, registration, inspections and all that. Does it define it as basically 30 days or longer term?
For the typical residential rentals, yes.
So this would be for
Short-term.
short term up to 30 days.
Yeah.
And then that's takes care of any situation,
Mhm.
long term or short term. And it has the 3 strikes you're out. It has safety inspections every so often.
Yes,
every
everything's the
years.
same with the exception of the residential rentals. When you change occupancy, we do
Oh,
an
yeah,
inspection.
okay.
That's the only thing that we do not do with the short term.
Right, yeah, that would make sense. So it's really from kind of like the livability of the unit, the safety of the unit, smoke detectors, all that sort of thing. It's being looked at just like the long-term ones, just not as frequently. Which,
Well, we do them annually, the inspections for the short term,
okay.
where
That's still
the
good
residential
frequency.
rentals are every 3 years. So.
Well,
That's a good.
and-
Okay.
And that works because conceivably the fees that you're assessing are covering your costs for having to do an annual inspection.
Yeah.
So
Does that also include multi-unit, residential units? Is it different for multiple units, like when you have 3 units in one building? How often-
For the short-term rentals?
No.
I'm sorry, what was it?
Apartments, like when there's 3 apartments in one, a multi-unit?
Mhm.
Do you do those inspections more often, or could the occupants change like every 3 or 4 months, because some of them do? Do you do an inspection before they leave?
Yes.
Or is that not? Is it-
That's what we call new tenant walkthrough. So we have the 3-year rental inspection. If occupancy changes in any of those units, we go in and inspect that unit before somebody else comes in.
Okay, just our conversation prior to this, we were discussing, you asked whether we should hold the
yes.
panel.
So what I think the most, because I'd like to be efficient, but also get everybody's opinions. I mean, we could have a 3-hour conversation on short-term rentals, which we don't have. We have to be done in 30 minutes. So what I'd like to do first is I'd like to poll everybody, and I'd like to see sort of where you are leaning in terms of, Are you thinking a restrictive approach to short-term rentals? Are you thinking a more relaxed approach to short-term rentals, or are you in the middle? I'd like to know that. What I'd like to do next is have a conversation with regards to, I just have a professional opinion regarding zoning ordinances, and I want to get that out on the table, just in terms of making sure that it's there. And then I'd like to have a conversation about zoning districts. What are we comfortable with? Because it's a lot easier for us to come up with regulations if we at least have an idea in our mind geographically about where we're trying to regulate this. And then we can move into talking about potential ordinance requirements. I brought copies of this template ordinance again. This sort of gives us sort of a linear format to run through. What are the, and I brought copies for everybody, what are the decision-making points? But we also have the information handout that I pulled together. So Mary, it's sort of up to you how you would like to move forward with that. I would like to do the poll and the conversation about zoning districts first.
Okay. Short-term rentals, how do you feel about it, Nate?
I think you were the three options.
Well, I was just going to do, who's leaning towards restrictive? Who's more restrictive? Okay. Who's thinking a bit more flexible? Anybody on the fence?
I'm in the middle, but leaning.
Leaning, okay.
restrictive.
All right, so we're
Because I don't
have,
want it to be too restrictive, but I definitely don't want it to be.
we're halvesy split, and that's okay. So my opinion about zoning, and this is a professional opinion, is we want to try, when at all possible, to not be zoning for the bad apple. And the reason that is because there are all sorts of unintended consequences when we put together a zoning ordinance and we adopt it and we start administering it. The less, and when I say this, I'm not advocating for, but the less regulations that we start with is sometimes better, because it gives us an opportunity to see how the regulations are progressing, to see what's happening, and to allow us to even identify if there will be problems. So I just want to throw that out there. The other part of this is more restrictive ordinances are going to require more staff time. And we don't know whether or not that is actually needed at this point, if that makes any sense. So regulations need to be considered both about in terms of their impact on the environment, but then also the impact on staff. And what we never want to do is have regulations in place that just can't be enforced. Because it puts the municipality in a very difficult position, because then you're only reactive enforcement. So those are just overarching thoughts to think about when we talk about this. So has anybody thought about where you think it most appropriate to see short-term rentals within the borough?
We were discussing at the last meeting that the downtown commercial, correct? I think that is great, but slightly restrictive. I think that we could branch out. I'm not sure how far we could branch out. I do think that it will put a burden on code enforcement and zoning officers. And we don't have a big code enforcement
We don't.
team or zoning officer team.
You don't, but let me just interrupt there. Conceivably, you'd be assessing a fee that would provide you with the resources you need to administer the program, and that's really important to think about. So I know that what I said is you want to make sure that you're not overstep, but again, the intent, and this is sort of something that has to be discussed behind the scenes, I think, but municipalities can make money on short-term rentals. It is a viable income stream. It is a viable economic development tool. So I think that there's a business side of this and there's a regulatory side. I think that what we would want to do would be able to balance the fee that we could get with the regulations that we're putting in place.
Well,
What would that be?
I have no idea.
roughly?
I don't know. I think if I remember correctly, you know how you do kayak, right? And you're booking a flight or a hotel, and it's going to search all of the other websites and get you the lowest price. Some municipalities use a cloud-based platform like that to monitor their short-term rentals. So this platform is
Oh, yeah,
checking
we did.
VRBO, all sorts of, and they're pulling it down from the cloud. They're telling you, you're getting a report. Here are the short-term rentals that are advertising in your community. You're checking to see if they're licensed. It's up to the municipality how much they want to charge for the fee itself. And we could probably get, I just haven't done that yet. We could get kind of a smattering of what everybody else charges within the Lancaster area or the southern PA area. But then usually the cloud-based platform charges like $4 or $5 a license for them to be monitoring.
Have we asked Chief Brummer, has anyone asked Chief Brummer what kind of burden this will put on the police department? Because I know that we've had issues with some, and I'm all for the short-term rentals. Mark said that he and his children only use the Airbnbs, the short-term, and all of that. So I'm for it. I'm just,
You're essentially
I
buying
just-
local.
said that
Right.
again.
You're essentially buying local.
Right.
And I understand your question, Brad. I'm not sure that we can quantify what the potential impact could be, because you're essentially trying to quantify, and again, it's what I said before, you're trying to how many bad apples are we going to get in this bunch? We don't know.
Yeah.
My only concern is, I understand what you're saying with the regulation. However, I'm all for a proactive approach instead of reactive. And so if you start less restrictive and then you do have more bad apples, so to speak, with it, and then they're grandfathered in, it's going to be harder to change.
I think you can build into the regulations, just like there's a 3-strike rule for, we have to grant that person a license. And I think if you can build into the regulations, just like we have a 3-strike rule with if you've got more, if you have 3 nuisance calls to the police department, we're going to yank your license. So I think that we already have it built in. There's a precedent, it's supported. There are other ordinances that use that. I don't see why we couldn't
As long as it's consistently enforced.
use a tool like that.
Is there something in the fee schedule now that the borough adopts every year for short-term rentals?
Yes.
Oh, is there? How do you?
There's a fee schedule adopted every year. They look at it every year and
We
usually.
currently have short-term rentals now,
Right.
so it's just a matter of, do you want to make changes to the current policy ordinances, or do you
Oh,
want?
that's true. There is a current. Yep.
Yeah, there is a current
Yep.
Ordinance, yeah.
ordinance 912.
And the second thing would be, how far you want to stay that. You can have it.
So my thought with regards to the zoning districts, when I looked at the map, was to allow short-term rentals in the downtown commercial, the high-density residential multifamily, the areas that are highway commercial, the medium-density residential light business, neighborhood commercial, riverfront commercial. And then the question I would pose is, do you want to do institutional residential? And the reason that I say that is because think about the planning transect, right? So your farms, your agriculture, you're moving into suburbia, you're moving out of suburbia into the downtown, you're moving into your downtown, and here's your industrial, right? So there's this scale of intensity that we typically move through. And the way that development has naturally occurred, you can see even here, based on where the factories were, they're butt up against residential, but that's where the workers lived.
Mhm.
Typically, though, what you're seeing is that transect of you're moving through the density scale. So in thinking about that, typically short-term rentals are not permitted in the industrial zones. And I think that given everybody's concerns about short-term rentals and the fact that they're so new and sort of an untested economic development strategy, I would advocate not allowing them in the rural residential, the low-density residential, or the medium-density residential. And then allow them in everything, and then all of the other, like institutional residential, it's already a mixed-use zone. So is medium-density residential, light business. Those are all mixed-use zoning districts. And I see no reason why you wouldn't allow short-term rentals in your mixed-use zoning districts and your commercial zoning districts.
Yeah, that makes sense there. I mean, especially, you kind of think of like natural opportunities being the units above commercial, and downtown, the shops and all that.
I think if we lose the downtown mixed use, because it's walkable and to bring people into the downtown, and that makes complete sense. But you had also mentioned like high density residential.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
that concerns me.
So I'm looking at the future land use map.
Right.
So based on that, you would be looking at it in everything but conservation and parks and open space and utility and industrial.
It would be in, say that again?
It would-
Everything but?
Everything but
But,
conservation.
Yep.
Industrial.
Yep.
Parks and open space
mhm.
and utility.
No, low, medium density residential would not be included.
So that's okay.
So
That's where the space is between the houses,
I don't understand why that's significant.
because of not having noise and
Party wall.
disruption to neighbors.
High density, there's no parking for people coming in and out, everybody has all their spaces locked in, there's no access to parking.
Parking ordinance already.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it would
me
just,
too.
they would
I
just have to
agree.
follow the ordinance and all, these
So
are
it
be,
has to be detached.
This is.
no, it doesn't have to be detached. Those spaces they are all providing, all of those homes,
Yeah, but isn't detached in the already?
but you can change it.
You can change it.
And I don't, if there are concerns, I don't necessarily think that you need to have a side yard for a short-term rental. Some people don't need a yard. Some people are just looking for a place to spend a weekend in Columbia. And it makes sense to do those in your downtown environs. It also makes sense because these are an economic development tool. It does make sense to allow them in the high-density residential areas of the borough because those are the areas that we're looking to see reinvestment in. Just my planning opinion.
Maybe that's, okay. What about that? Oh, that's the way.
Hopefully, everyone can see the downtown next. As we discussed and deliberated over the other, with the existing ordinance, I have a concern about the high density.
I was in the house on the street, some people walk along the street, some detached. People going in and out next door, it was so loud. There must have been 10 people in that house. It was loud the whole time the open house was going on. I know what some detached is going to do, but that's not a detached. So that's part of.
Well, in the
Where you
high
get your
density,
talking
you're
about.
even talking about
Well, that's right, and it's where sheds, so people coming in want to stay there, there is people, I just think this. I'm not for it.
I'm a little hesitant on the high
That's-
density as well.
You don't have to convince me. I gave you,
Yeah, no, I'm
that's
just
up to
giving
you
my
guys.
opinion. Only because we live in a row home, we could hear a tap drops
Mhm.
in the room right next door to us. And you start having kids and parties and people coming in and out. It's a free for all.
Well, the thing is, you're saying kids and parties, thing is, I have thought in the short-term residential that I have to look at it here. But you were talking family units. You weren't talking just having
But if a family had
a gang of kids coming in.
let's say, well, I'm not talking a gang of kids, but say
Adult
hypothetically,
family kids.
you, Mary, had a rental unit. Pick anywhere in the high density residential area, and you decided to have a reunion and bring in 30 of your relatives.
Well, the ordinance
It-
wouldn't,
it-
the ordinance wouldn't
Right,
allow
you
that.
would- It wouldn't allow it.
Because
it
there's-
limits the number of
Yeah.
people within the property.
Yeah.
Even if you bring in 5 girlfriends, they're not all quiet. That's it. And add a couple bottles of wine, not really quiet at all.
That's a tough one.
Well, remember, and I understand where everybody's coming from, but we're also looking for, in our high-density residential areas, we want to see more access to variety. We want to see, corner stores again. I would
Right.
just encourage everybody to stretch your minds on what can be done in high-density
I would very
residential.
much like to see that, but I think if they could stay here and still walk to that.
Right now, it's
And I
just in
mean-
downtown.
I honestly did not, no, it's not. Right now, I thought it was only in the medium density residential business, just that,
That's what it is.
just that
That's
blue
right.
area.
Yeah.
But I'll be honest, I did not compare the existing legislation.
Yeah, the
with the template.
existing, if I remember, because we went through that.
Mhm.
For a long time.
It does have the type of restrictions in terms of occupancy and being in a licensed program, having the inspection, because it has the nuisance issue too, right? So those protections are there. Really, the question is like, does it need to be in more districts?
Right.
Otherwise, the program's in place. I guess it could get refined or something, but I think the safeguards are in place in terms of it being up to snuff, the unit being up to snuff, and having some sort of contact person who's responsible and that sort of thing. Really, it comes down to what other districts are we?
Well, you can also, the other decision-making points are, are you only going to allow an owner-occupied short-term rental? You could allow less restrictive short-term rentals in the downtown and then allow short-term rentals in the residential neighborhoods, only if they're owner-occupied. Other communities have done
I
that.
can see
I would be more
that.
comfortable with that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, so you basically have the people living there and maybe they have an apartment instead of doing long-term
So
rentals upstairs.
You
or
could do
whatever.
that in the high-density residential neighborhood, allow short-term rentals, but they can only be owner-occupied short-term rentals.
I have,
Then you convert properties into
Again, it's.
semis.
Right.
yeah, well,
Well,
that's true.
we have a,
You can't-
the borough has a 100% restriction
How
on,
big are occupied, then you switch them around.
So it'd have to be, like, it would
Because
have
you're
to be
renting
an
your
existing
home.
apartment.
they wouldn't be there. So it would almost be like, hey, I'm
Oh.
going away on vacation for 2 weeks in Disney. I mean, honestly, that's, well, I guess that's what you're
I
asking.
was thinking, like, it would be an apartment above
Right,
the
that's the
place.
neighborhood.
Yeah. But they both make sense.
What, so,
You have a resident there while the tenants are.
Yeah, that's where I was
For
thinking. yeah.
more.
there is a moratorium in the zoning ordinance on breaking up a single-family
Right.
dwelling.
So it'd have to be already. in
So
place.
if it's going to be an owner-occupied short-term rental, it's going to be the situation where they're going to be gone for 2 weeks, they're going to rent it for 2 weeks, they're going to be gone every third weekend of the month, and they're willing to rent their place out.
It's not that they're going to be in residence while someone else is there. Currently,
I mean, they could be, but that would be
we
weird.
only allow 2 persons per bedroom.
Right.
And
I think.
overnight guests, other than members of the entity renting the facility, are not allowed.
Mhm.
I thought this was a fairly strict
Yeah.
ordinance.
The
Yeah.
when it was
text,
put-
yeah, the text is
Right.
good.
The model
Text
ordinance,
is
you mean?
good.
What we have,
What you have already.
Already.
So it would just be whether or not we want to expand the zones. and the
Yeah.
districts.
I mean,
And I think, do you keep this, it has to be a single family, a standalone, but it can't be a duplex or a detached.
We don't have to find any of that.
It has to be a detached dwelling, and that really limits it.
sure,
And the only place you have detached, when you get into, when I'm looking at the future land use, is once you get into the low and medium density.
But is that where you want to have short-term rentals?
Yeah, that's the question. No.
And that would not work, so the tool, that wouldn't work for the downtown, obviously.
right,
Mhm.
right, yeah. You either allow them downtown or you don't. That's-
So you've got to do away with that limiting factor of having to be in a detached dwelling.
Only in certain areas though, so you
That
could,
just really limits.
well, what if you were to allow short-term, so short-term rentals are, owner-occupied short-term rentals are allowed in the low-density and the medium-density residential zoning districts in single-family detached home only. Short-term rentals are allowed in the downtown commercial, other commercial areas with less restrictions.
And do you put a time frame that they can only be rented for so many?
Most
Days
most
a
folks
year.
do up to 30 days and no more than 30 days in a year to the same rental maybe, but they're going to be, I'd have to look into that because they're going to be folks that this is it's their side gig. Like they're leasing their place.
Mhm.
There's a lot of people that trust people to live in their house for 2 weeks like that.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, haven't you ever, growing up, my grandmother had a beach house on Long Beach Island and, we got to use it when it was cold.
Yeah.
But then during the season, it was rented out every 2 weeks, every
Mhm.
week it was rented by somebody else.
I don't feel always in a lot of time like that.
Well, no, that's different, but
It's different, it's not an occupied.
I didn't realize that's what you were. That's the distinction you were making.
So how does everyone feel? We have. Great.
I think some of the, what Jess gave us last month, is small community impacts. I think there's some good points there, and I think those are the things, one of the things you need to be looking at, and highlight what you want to see, what you don't want to see. She's laid it out conservative and liberal.
If you were to do that and then get it to either Paula or myself, like let's say within 2 weeks from now, you guys could get me some marked up, highlighted, these are the text regulations that I'd like to see, then what I can do is ordinance and identify the discussion points. All right, we got numerous different feedback on this
Mhm.
one part of the regulation. Let's discuss this out and figure out what we want it to be.
I mean, I'll look over the existing ordinance, but I didn't necessarily feel, my recollection of before, that there was an issue with kind of how they're handled.
Not the existing ordinance, if
Right.
there was anything in any of the new material that you wanted to
Yeah, and that's,
see in
when I
that
went through
ordinance.
it all,
Yeah.
I kept coming up with the stuff that we already had.
Yeah, okay.
Like the local contact,
Mhm.
occupancy limit, 2 per bedroom, things like that I think really can kind of keep it in a certain scope. Now, of course, if you're renting a really huge house with 5 bedrooms, it's trouble.
Yeah.
But, so there, I was thinking, where, and I think I do, but we have 5 minutes.
Where?
Where
I
to
mean-
add, where to add.
Add?
Borough. So do we want to do another poll? Start with downtown? Who wants to see it expanded to downtown? There's Eric, all right.
I would the mixed use, because I think it's great to have people brought into downtown, like you said, it's a great economic tool and be able to
Mhm.
get to a lot of our places. I think, it would be more fitting because we have the mixed use anyway with the storefront and then the living space. So that makes complete sense to me.
Gateway
I,
commercial.
I agree with that, I agree with mixed use and downtown.
Who's talking about?
So then the next step would be high density residential.
No.
That's okay. That's all right.
Can I say something, Mary?
Yes, you may. Eric wants it everywhere.
I want it everywhere. Industrial as well. Anyway, short-term rental is a business.
Mhm.
And it's also relevant. So to say you don't want somebody next to you in a high-density rental, a row home, yet you're okay with that home being an own rental.
We're not
We're not.
necessarily, but they're.
That's the way the ordinance is, that's the way zoning is
Yeah,
now.
right.
But being a business, the way the short-term business works, is it's all based on neighbors. So if you have loud neighbors, nobody's gonna wanna stay there. If you have rowdy guests, then we have codes and laws that enforce rowdy guests. So there's curfews in this town, noise ordinances, there's all kinds of nuisance laws.
Mhm.
So it is regulated.
A couple of years ago, Eric, we had, don't remember the name of the people. He's the next door neighbor of the house that's a STR up on 1,000 block of Locust Street. They were here at every meeting complaining and begging us to change the ordinance. They would call the police, and I mean, I love our police, but they have more better to do than to be showing up for a noise complaint. So every single month, they were here and they were complaining that we have to shut that down.
Was it the resident?
And
Was
that's
it a
that's
property
an
owner or was
expansive
it a guest?
property owner
Property
I
owner.
think
of
it's-
the people who live next door to it.
Yeah.
And I've actually been invited into that STR from friends that rent it when their family come up from Virginia and different places from around the country.
You were an outside guest? You, no kidding.
They,
For the
but
day.
they're very quiet,
For you.
very quiet people. But I could see, I mean, if you've been in that house and the yard, and the
Mhm.
barbecue, it's expansive, and I can see it
Ultimately,
getting out of control. There's no pooling anymore, but
ultimately, whatever happens is gonna have to be passed by council. Do you have an idea what the tone is? Like, we could all say, we don't want it
Oh, we see
only
what-
here, and
No,
council's like, well, no, this isn't enough, and so it'll come back. But if we say it's gonna be here, there, and the other, council's like, that's too much, then it's gonna come back. So is there any indication whether,
I may be alone on that.
because yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's fair to limit a person's opportunity to make income. To follow the rules.
I think it ruins the small town environment where you can go across the street and talk to your neighbors. Where I have 4 rentals across the street and they take care of their property, probably not.
I don't think you can compare Maryland,
But you
though,
can't
rentals
compare-
are,
I understand that, but the neighbors look out for each other in certain blocks. And when you start filling them in 4 in a block, then that ambiance is gone. It's not there anymore. But that's my thought on it. Maybe you don't really care, maybe somebody comes out and talks to their neighbors, I don't know, but I do.
It would be great to have, when we had the presentation, the idea of presenting a packet and some program that the potential renters, not the people that are gonna rent, but the people who want to have. a
the owners of the
short-term
short-term rental.
rental. Right. Through some sort of program to maybe try and.
You could do that.
have a consistent set of rules.
Right.
It would just be the back end. It would just be the back end of how are we doing that? Who's doing it?
Right.
How often are we doing it and what's the workload?
And it probably
Okay.
should be done before they sign the agreement of sale, purchase of property, instead of coming in and saying, oh, you know, in your due diligence. Take this class before you decide to move forward in a potential
SEI.
Okay.
Okay, you've got your homework. Over the next 2 weeks, get some feedback, Paula, should forward to Jess.
Yeah.
And base it off of
I think it's,
the document that Paula, that Jess presented last month.
it sounded like we're kind of in agreement though, that it's just to where we want to expand it.
I think we're close now.
You might
With
have to
any
tweak,
text
you're gonna have to
suggestions.
tweak some things, like,
Yes,
it's not gonna make
The
sense
type
to
of
have it
structure.
be
Yeah.
single-family detached
Yep.
only. Yep, okay, I can take a look at all that stuff, though.
Okay, thank you, Jess.
Yeah, thank you guys, good luck tonight.
Thanks, Jess.
thanks,
Seven
Jess.
oh three, we will adjourn the work session and we will go into